All right, guys, I'm sorry. I'm having a little trouble with the two monitors and trying to with basically having it like recording because it's recording only one screen, but basically to my right, I've actually got the slideshow as it's supposed to look. And what you guys are going to see is actually the my notes and this page. A couple of times I've been able to get it to duplicate, but it also just after I gotten about 6 or 7 minutes of this recorded, it just all froze up. So I'm just going to kind of roll this way, and hopefully it's going to be all right. Because I do not see now the way to do this. All right, so. Standard 5 and 6 are basically about advertising and other public statements, record keeping, and fees. And Standard 5 is all about advertising and public statements. And I just went through all this, but so I'm going to go ahead and do it again. Basically, we don't lie. You know, we have to keep in mind that there's a number of things. It's not just like if I'm posting something on Instagram or I'm doing an advertisement. We're not supposed to lie on our resumes, our vitas. We don't lie on grant applications, licensure applications, which, by the way, you can actually go to jail if you lie on some of those. You know, we probably shouldn't endorse products, and you're treading into Dr. Oz territory, and nobody wants to go there. We don't lie when we're trying to get credentials. You know, any sort of print advertising we're not supposed to do. When we're doing legal proceedings, and so it is any time we are public facing in any capacity. So, but we also don't disparage other people, so I probably shouldn't be talking about Dr. Ross. All right, so we don't make false statements about our training and competence, our degrees, how much our fees are. So basically, the scientific or clinical basis for results. Oh, we don't, we would never say like, you know, this is 100% proven effective and I developed it myself and then start doing cognitive behavior therapy. That is not, you know, yours. We don't lie about our publications or research findings. And we only basically claim degrees as credentials for services we offer, only if those degrees were earned at a regionally accredited educational institution or were the basis for which we got licensure. So technically you don't have to go to an accredited institution to get licensed, and that's why they put that little caveat in there. It's just harder if you don't, because you have to demonstrate, like, you just have to prove that the classes were worthy, so to speak. Oh, if we hire somebody to do advertisements or build our website and they lie, it doesn't matter. You're supposed to make sure the information is correct. So you can't claim that they did it without asking or you didn't realize. You are supposed to vet the information and make sure it's accurate. We also don't compensate anyone in the media, or I think like an influencer, to basically publicize our items or basically endorse us. So if one of the Kardashian sisters is talking about how great the therapist is, and basically flashes their number at the bottom of the TikTok, that's actually really unethical and kind of icky. So, so be careful. And if we are doing an advertisement, then and we paid somebody to advertise, then we have to say that it is a paid advertisement, and people recognize that. If we are doing a workshop, then you have to make sure that, or something like that, that the people are representing you correctly. So, you know, usually it's minimal, but, you know, things will happen like people will introduce me as an MD, which I have to correct, you know, I should absolutely correct. And, you know, make sure that the audience understands who we are and what our objectives are, our training is, and all that sort of thing. So be accurate in how we present these things and don't mislead people about who you are and what your role is. Yeah, so, and you know, you always explain what you're trying to do when you're basically doing a workshop. You know, it's that little statement. Today we're going to talk about, you know, you're not going to hit them up with a MLM sort of request. When we do a public, any sort of advice, you're not doing therapy. Like if you want to be Dr. Phil, what he does is not therapy. It's just not therapy. And because they're not taking the time to do a full assessment, that's not how we do therapy. At best, you would say that's like advice, kind of like an advice columnist, and anybody can be an advice columnist. But that being said, and the reason Dr. Phil had to basically give up his license is because we also, in all of this, if we are going to give advice, we need to make sure that the statements we make are in alignment with our professional knowledge, training, and experience, also in alignment with the professional literature and practice. So, for example, I'm going to go ahead and rip Dr. Oz again. When he starts hawking pomegranate pills for heart disease, that is not in alignment with the professional literature and the standards of his practice. So, they keep trying to take away his license, but, well, the hospital and the doctors who work with him keep trying to petition that the board take away his license, and as far as I know, that hasn't happened yet. I've also heard he's actually a pretty good cardiologist or cardiac surgeon. So we also cannot present ourselves in that situation as this person's therapist. So you have to make clear that all you're doing is giving advice, which is just one step shy of entertainment. And we don't get patients to give testimonials to try to get more folks into our office. Oh, we're not an ambulance chaser, so it would be really icky and awkward if I went to, for example, a 24-hour gyms and started handing out my cards to anyone who walked out and maybe had a visual appearance of someone who might get used my services. That would be super icky and awful. So basically don't people call us for services. We don't basically go out and try to recruit them, especially in a vulnerable population. So it'd be bad if you were a grief counselor and you hung out at funeral homes. That's just kind of horrible and awful. So, yeah, that doesn't mean that we can't make referrals or find other contacts for someone we're working with. And it doesn't prohibit us from doing like community or disaster or community outreach services. But usually when I'm doing that, someone has called me and asked if I would be willing to go do a talk with a group. It's not me sort of looking for that. Also, though, if I do that talk, I'm not handing out my cards at the talk. That just seems inappropriate. So, collateral treatment, essentially, you can have someone, I ask patients all the time to have their significant other or their family attend a session. So, usually, though, if you're going to do that, then it has to be to benefit the patient and not just because you're curious or something like that. So a couple session is something that you can actually absolutely do. And we can, in an emergency, like I said, volunteer to do services. If you're like the first person on the scene, you can kind of dive in. Usually it's a more organized approach then. All right, well, C5 was fast. All right, so let's talk about record keeping. So in the Q&A, somebody was asking about files, and I took a little break and I was sort of thinking about it. And, ethically, we're supposed to keep records. And I am almost positive there are also legal. There are laws that state that, medical records must be kept. And certainly it is the standard of the profession. And I can tell you that if a client doesn't want me to keep records, I can't comply with that. Legally, I can't point you exactly to the law, but it's always been that you are legally obligated to keep a record of your services. Most businesses are, if you think about it. The repair shop is supposed to keep a record of all the repairs that they've done on your car, with the idea that if you ever question what was done, if you are unhappy with the outcome, or you want to get those records to provide them to the next buyer of your car, basically, they have to keep them. So there are laws about keeping records in a variety of disciplines. It is also ethically mandated that we create, to the extent records are under our control, maintain, disseminate, store, retain, and dispose of records and data relating to their professional and scientific work. In order to, we keep the records to facilitate provision of services later by them or by other professionals. My progress notes and my therapy notes are to help me keep track of what we have done, and also for someone to be able to pick up and continue working with someone. In some instance, if I'm unable to no longer provide services, they need to be referred to a different professional for a different aspect of things, like to a psychiatrist. We are supposed to keep those records. Also, in our research, we have to be able to have someone else replicate our research design and analyses, so we're supposed to keep our data. Meet institutional requirements. The state and the university have policies on how long we keep educational records and how we keep them and store them. We need to ensure accuracy of billing and payments. So in part, when you're doing your record, your case notes, that is also a record of each time the person came in, so you can double check your billing records with that and ensure compliance with the law. So we have to keep records, both with our scientific work, some educational work. There are always organizational standards, and especially in therapy. All right, so these are the different components that a psychologist should always consider including in the records of their services. And so someone asked about names, like you have the name on the file, but you also have identifying and contact information. It's actually one continuing education seminar I went to recommended that in instances where someone might be at risk and you might have to, like you have a crisis call, you might want to keep some minimal amounts of information on your person so that you can reach out and contact their family or their emergency contact in the event that they're in a crisis. A patient calls at night and they're in crisis and I don't have their home address. How am I going to call 911 to get them to that place? So it's tricky though, because I certainly wouldn't want like every record that I have on my person. But if I know someone is a little bit risky, then I might want to keep that like sort of in my phone, coded, like under a different name so that I'm protecting their confidentiality, but so that I can get help to them should they need it. In your actual record, you always have identifying data and contact information, any information about their fees and billing, so like their insurance record, as well as the records where they signed and gave you permission to file billing. Informed consent and waivers of confidentiality stay in that medical record / your progress notes. If there's any sort of mandated reporting requirements, you keep those up to date in your the medical record. The diagnosis are the basis for requests for services and the treatment plan. And so you basically will document, these are the therapeutic interventions we did in the session. So it's also a good idea to always have that you assessed whether the person was in crisis. For example, so I always document no suicidal, homicidal ideation or intent. You have to actually ask or have a system for evaluating that with the patient. With borderline folks, if you ask them directly, it can cause a whole bunch of problems. So you have to navigate that with them. I also always have if the person was on time for the appointment and if they were neatly dressed and groomed. Decreases in hygiene can be a early warning sign that the person is facing an imminent crisis. I also always ask about how they're sleeping, like have you been sleeping? And then after that, it depends on the patient. Like with eating disorder patients, I'll ask them, for example, about if they're not doing their food monitoring, I might ask them to do a 24-hour recall of what have you had to eat over the past 24 hours? How many times have you purged over the past week? How many times have you binged? And all of that goes in that record. Yeah, and so this is some of the other stuff that this was talking about. So you always want to have the date of the session, how long it lasted, what you did, like, were you conducting treatment? So usually it's like cognitive therapy of this disorder. These were the specific techniques we did today. The nature of the professional intervention, and that's like thought monitoring, I think. Whether it was in person, email, or phone. And technically, if I get a phone call, I am supposed to actually document that the next time I'm in the office in the in my chart. And any sort of assessment of the client, their status. So, like that's neatly dressed and groomed. This is the form that's an intake form. I got it. This is the progress note that I was talking about earlier. And so, for example, hopefully you guys can sort of see this. So this was the one that used to be on Division 12, and it's not there anymore, but I still use it. And so basically, if you notice, like I always document their mental status. The risk is where I would write no suicidal, homicidal, any change in their functioning. And this is just a good way to keep it organized. It has most of the things that we just talked about. Some of the other information, here we go. So these are some of the forms that I use. And so, for example, this is the information that the receptionist is supposed to take when they call our clinic. And I had mentioned this before they schedule, that the receptionist is supposed to ask if they make sure they know to come in a few minutes early on the first day, because I'm going to give them some assessment measures to complete before we start our session. Also make sure that they're going to be okay to wait until the next appointment date. If they say no, then they have to be immediately referred to an emergency service. The COPE line is the lake, and that is a good point of contact if someone seems to need emergency services. So, and then email me. Basically, I've had trouble with the receptionist at the clinic, so I had to be very clear about, you are supposed to email me. So when they say, oh, I forgot, well, then you didn't do my intake form, did you? Because it's right there. You're supposed to initially. Yeah, it doesn't go like that, but in my head, that's what's supposed to happen. This is a release for insurance filing, so I can basically file their insurance for them. And then this is, we had talked about before, this is the consent for psychological evaluation. So this is a formed and documented, I am consenting for an assessment. And then these are the 3 instances in which I have to basically break confidentiality. So I have this signed, so it's in my chart, and I have documentation. I also go over this with them and document it again. This is for the evaluation or the initial assessment. Basically, once I do the assessment, then I'll present a treatment plan to them, and I document that we did that. And usually we'll have a separate piece of paper where I've sort of typed up the initial goals of treatment, or make sure I put them in the note. And the patient consented to proceed. So you document that basically they gave you permission for you to do the actual session. So insurance companies would really like for you to be on call 24/7, 365 days a year, which is really difficult. And most of the time, we're going to be in practices that don't have enough staff for you to rotate the crisis line. Some places do. And so what'll happen is the people who work at the clinic will have, like, I'm on call for this week, but you're on call next week, which means you get all those after hours calls. My clinic does not offer that. And so I have a conversation with my patients about the fact that, especially with my disposition, but there are just going to be times where I am not reachable. And, I always sort of talk to them about the fact that if your idea is in the middle of the night, you're going to call me at 2 o'clock in the morning because you're in crisis, at that point, I'm assuming you're telling me that you're not capable of holding on until the morning, and I'm going to tell you to go straight to the emergency room because this is an emergency situation. So these are just some numbers that I put together. This was a while back. The phone is a crisis line in Baton Rouge that is staffed by volunteers, and I've said this is not quite correct because I think there's a new national suicide hotline that I need to update my forms with. There's some others, for example, like there's an adolescent suicide hotline. So you have essentially, if I'm not available, this is what you do. And so if I'm not available, the first thing you do is, if you think this is just you need somebody to talk to, you call these. If you think that you are not going to be safe, you go to the emergency room. So there's a very clear, this is what you do if you are in crisis. That's the progress note. APA has basically guidelines for record keeping in terms of what we're supposed to keep and what's supposed to be within those our charts, which I gave over, but this is a good thing to look at when you do start your practice. In general, in terms of keeping the records, this was always one that we have to search for. Typically, it was 7 years. That's always the number that I have in my head. I don't remember what HIPAA says, but basically make sure you're in compliant with state law. The 7 years seems to be always a good sort of safe bet that you're exceeding that. Again, though, these days with the ability to scan or keep digital records, they are recommending we actually keep them. There's, as long as, you just need bigger and bigger storage drives, right? And so essentially, but if you do that, you need to make sure you encrypt it, have extra levels of security so that someone can't just pick up a jump drive and walk off with it. So in general, like I said, they recommend like a computer that's not connected to the internet. And you want to keep it like password protected, encrypted data, and clouds scare me with this kind of data. So be extra special careful. All right, so we talked about this a little bit before, but psychotherapy notes are privilege in terms of federal lawsuits. Those are the process, like the process notes. Remember, we talked about the process or personal notes versus the other. You don't have to keep those for 7 years because those you don't actually have to turn over. And since we talked about this on the last recording, I'm not going to go through it all again. Yep, and always keep them separate. Do not have them in the same folder, even if they're a different color paper. They're very clear about that, and that's what some people would try to do. That just seems dangerous. All right, so we keep research records for about the same period of time. So all right, so in general, we make sure we maintain confidentiality, so you really do need to think through, if I keep my record or I do this, how is it going to be safe? Cloud options, I'm sure, are now being sold to medical professionals, but you got to make sure that this is encrypted, safe, and that a hacker is not going to be able to just open up an Excel file and see all the stuff that is supposed to be confidential information. Yeah, and encoding. You can also, if you're trying to keep, like, for example, billing records, that you can actually code that if it has sensitive information, so it doesn't really identify the patient's name. So we're also supposed to basically make plans for if there's a time in which I become incapacitated, I'm no longer at the practice, for example. And so what happens is going to be a little bit different depending on what type of practice. Like if you're working at a hospital, they keep the records. For me, it's always been a little weird because I'm a contract worker, and so I'm going to have a conversation with my practice about what happens with my records should I retire or no longer do this, because technically I need to have a place where someone can still contact to get those records, and I'm not really going to want that to be my home address. So I haven't really thought that through yet. I guess that'll be my ethical dilemma moving forward. I'm going to try to get the clinic to keep them, would be my hope. So if someone has an emergency, and so like, it's not a good practice to withhold records, right? There's some folks that will try to do it, like if the person has a bill. Hospitals sometimes have not always been very helpful. Like sure, you can have your records, but it's like a $1 a page. We're not supposed to do that. HIPAA's cut down on a lot of that, but let's be very, very clear. If it's an emergency situation, you do not keep those records. You pass those on to the next professional. I don't think it's a good idea to hold them hostage no matter what. If you have a patient who has not paid look at a billing, look at a collection agency where you effectively sell the debt, but you don't have to give them information about anything about their actual, they don't get details about why they were at your practice. It was just they owe you this much money. Or honestly, you write off debt, talk to your accountant. But, we can't be this. We're talking about if it were a medical issue and my life depended on this, it would be awful and horrible if a medical doctor withheld that simply because I had a balance on my account. So think of it that way. You should give those, I can't fathom someone doing this, but undoubtedly it happens sometimes. Send the records. It doesn't matter how they left. It doesn't matter if you're pissed off. It doesn't matter if they owe you money. You're supposed to still, at most, put their best care at heart. And if somebody's requesting the records, that's what you're supposed to do. So anyway, that's my 2 cents in some of the ethics code. So what the ethics code is very clear about is we can't do it in an emergency situation. So about fees and financial arrangements, basically, we need to upfront tell them what our fees are so that they know what this is going to cost. There are actually some laws now about transparency of medical. It was, they didn't give us covered health care or lower insurance costs, but now you have to know how much this is going to cost you. And you're supposed to do that with therapy, which is a little difficult because you're supposed to estimate how much the total cost of treatment is going to be in a situation where this isn't like you're going to surgery and the recovery is a particular time. So that's actually a law now. But I know Blue Cross Blue Shield has a lot of information for their providers where you can actually, in their database, look up what the average cost was for your patients in the past year and provide that sort of information to your patients as part of that transparency. So all of that actually kind of came in as I was winding down and just moving forward with Karma. We joked about it that she knows how many millions of dollars that she has spent on her mental health care, and that is actually accurate, but not with me. She was hospitalized a lot before we started working together. So we have to make sure that our fees are consistent with the law. And if you're going to potentially use collection agencies, then you need to let that person know and give them an opportunity to pay before you actually turn it over. So if you go with the collection agency, all they're supposed to get is the patient's name, the amount they owe, the date of the services, and that is it. Oh, then how to contact them. You don't give them any information about why the person was there or any other things. Barter. We can barter, but we talked about this already. It can't be clinically contraindicated. It can't be exploitative. So here's one to think about when you guys are doing the assignment. The one that I used as an example has a set market value, but think about ongoing services and how that would impact that situation. Hint, hint. So this is really going to be more of a situation where, like, again, especially in rural areas, there is a set price for a hog, and it is okay to be paid with a hog for that set market value. But let's be very careful with anything that's ongoing. In our reports to payers, we are accurate. So basically, don't commit fraud and basically charge a fee for something you didn't actually do. Doctors now, the way they have sort of reacted to managed care is that they bill for each separate thing you do. We don't get to do that. With therapy, we can't do 15 minutes. Only medical prescribers can do that. But I think the minimum is a 30-minute session, 45 or 55. And so we have to do those sessions. You do have some flex time to do your charting. So actually I think it's a 60-minute session and you get 5 minutes to do the in-between stuff, chart, and get to your next patient. So, and the difference, if you have if you're like the Blue Cross PPO, the difference between a 60-minute session and a 45-minute session is like $30, which adds up. So, but not every system is set up that way. But basically, we can't like bill for a 60-minute session and then another 15-minute session if you go over. That's not really kosher. You also can't do like a 60-minute psychotherapy session and an assessment session at the same time. There's special billing codes for how we do like a neuropsych evaluation or psychological evaluation. And when you're doing that, the interview portion is included in the fee for the assessment mostly. So you want to be sure about what you're doing before you go down that path. I don't do a lot of those, which is why I'm hedging a little bit. So make sure there's an accurate diagnosis. We don't put and the Affordable Care Act made a lot of advancements in this. I talked to you guys about mental health parity, I'm pretty sure. One of the temptations before was that if you knew that major depressive disorder was not going to be covered, but the person also worried a little bit, it would be inappropriate to put generalized anxiety disorder as their diagnosis simply because you know that one will get paid for. Also, sometimes people will get busted for things like, the insurance doesn't pay for marital therapy. And so they'll just bill it as an individual session with just the person who has insurance. That's fraud, because technically if there's two people in that room, if you're doing marital therapy, it is coded differently than an individual therapy session. That being said, I said before, I think in the Q&A, maybe earlier for this, but I can have or invite a partner. Now that is usually a one-off. It is still about that patient. It's not marriage therapy or ongoing marriage therapy with them. And so that I don't have to bill that as couples therapy. The family member or collateral person is there strictly in service of the individual patient that I'm working with. It is all to help them. You guys sort of got that? So, you don't have to bill a group therapy if a child's parents come into the session. That's not how that works. But you can't say it's individual therapy if you're actually doing ongoing marriage therapy. So you can't bill for missed appointments. You can charge, but that was probably the biggest thing. One of the guys who ran the clinic, one of the other clinics I was with, the no-show fees were the biggest things that got sent to collections because patients just didn't pay them. So, and be careful about phone calls. It's a little dicey about whether you can count that as an actual session or not. I don't. So it's first of all, you don't want to have that many. You don't want it to be a full session. It's more just trying to kind of help them calm down or be okay to make it through the night. And then you doing the work in the session where you have a lot more control and the person's right across from you. And so you're praying they're not going to hang up on you. Typically though, insurances don't pay for phone calls. Things have gotten a little different since COVID because you can, teletherapy, but teletherapy is more like a Google Meet, not a phone call. So, yeah, and then there's some rules, like there's some stuff that's in the contracts with the insurances, like, if they refuse to pay, you can't bill the patient, although my dentist does all the time, but we can't do that in therapy. We can't, if my contracted fee with the insurance company is for $125 for a 60-minute session, but if they were paying out of pocket, it would be $250. I cannot bill the client for the difference because in the contract I've said I have agreed to take the $125. If they say they're not going to pay for this, then you're not supposed to pass that cost on to the patient. So, yeah, this one is a little bit weird. So first, especially in the old days, before they tightened things up, a lot of the folks who graduated and were going through grad school a little bit before me weren't in a hurry to get licensed, because you could actually bill at that point under the person supervising you, their name. They've kind of, you're not supposed to do that anymore. You can have someone do like psychological testing, and you're billing it as psychological testing. But like individual therapy, if I'm supervising you, you can't bill under my name if you're not licensed. So you have to represent what you're doing accurately. And if there's multiple people involved, you basically only bill for the services provided. And we don't take fees for referrals. We don't pay for folks to refer to us, is what this one I think was trying to kind of to get a handle on. I want to make sure I'm not missing anything. Yeah, I think there's some more slides about this. So we can't split fees. So, you can't split fees with another professional only if you both, you can only split fees if you have both contributed to the service. I'm thinking like group therapy, sometimes we'll have two therapists. Honestly, guys, though, the idea of that makes my head hurt, and you need to be real careful about billing. So if you've got a bunch of people paying out of pocket, then you could probably do some fee splitting as long as both would have contributed equally, so you really are a co-therapist. I don't think you could do that if you're actually billing someone's insurance. I don't know how you would do that. Because you do it by service, like it's group therapy and you're billing it under your license code. I don't know, it's called what is it? It's like not a TES, it's a TE something number that we're all assigned to do billing. It's kind of like a tax ID number. And we also have a clearinghouse number. And so when I'm billing, it's usually under that. And so I don't know if you can actually have another one. But anyway, so other things that you can do, though, is that it's actually a common practice for psychologists will set up a practice, and you can charge, for example, rent. Like you own the building, you can charge other practitioners rent. Some places it's a flat fee. I actually did that for a little bit. I made more money, but there was a lot of pressure to always have a certain number of patients coming in and out. And the place I am now, they take a percentage, which is just easier because it's not going to hurt my bottom line. I'm not going to owe them money if I only see Karma once a week or once a month. So you can pay your employees a percentage. So like when I was doing neuropsych evaluations, it actually was a flat fee, but you could also do a percentage. But I used to get, I think it was $75 for a voc rehab eval and $150 for a full neuropsych. I was not getting paid well with all the hours that you put into that, but that was the fee I had negotiated. So paying an institution for referrals, I mean, that's basically sort of what you're doing with Blue Cross Blue Shield, except not exactly. You're not paying them, but that one seems a little icky, so approach with caution. And having a membership as part of an HMO where you're a preferred provider, they are effectively, you're agreeing to do their services for a reduced fee, and in return, you're getting a steady stream of referrals is the idea. All right, well, this one's gone long enough. Now I'm going to have to go down a rabbit hole for a couple of things if I can remember, but I apologize for this going long, but we did get through 2 standards. Go us. Thanks, guys.